Have you ever smelled war? I'm not talking about the blood, the guns, or the gunpowder. I am talking about the real, human, unbearable smell. Imagine thousands of men sweating under the scorching sun, marching for days dressed in heavy clothes that never dried. It's not epic, it is unhealthy. Forget the movies. The real life of a Roman soldier was a fetid, damp, quietly deadly nightmare. Endless marches, crowded camps, and a heat that turned sweat into mud glued to the skin. The wool stuck to the body, the leather roasted the thighs, and the breath, mixed with garlic, onions, and salted meat, created an atmosphere that no general would dare to describe in his speeches of glory. The dirt was as constant as the fear. It was not just discomfort, but an invisible enemy, disease. And she didn't come screaming. She would sneak in, and he overthrew entire legions. During the long campaigns, the smell of the body was just the beginning. Sweat mixed with dust turned into a crust on the skin. There was not enough soap, there was no time for baths. The priority was to survive the next day. The clothes made of wool or thick linen were soaked during the day and dried glued to the body at night if they dried at all. And this constant humidity was not only bothersome, it was lethal. Skin diseases spread like wildfire. Ringworms, scabies, rashes, and open wounds exposed to continuous friction. And as the soldiers ate their provisions, always smelling strong and difficult to digest, the heavy breath added one more ingredient to the invisible cloud of rot that blanketed the camps. The stench, which might have seemed like a small thing in the face of war, was actually the harbinger of an internal collapse. And where the bad smell dominated, the disease was approaching. If this truth surprised you, imagine what else was hidden about Rome. Only here do you discover the side that books ignore. Leave your like now and subscribe to the channel. Join those who want to know the story as it really was, raw, dirty, and unforgettable. The lack of hygiene transformed each legion into a fertile field for silent epidemics. It was enough for one man to fall ill, a fever here, an intestinal pain there, and in a few days, dozens were fallen. Diarrhea, dysentery, mysterious fevers, infections in the feet, eyes, skin, nothing escaped. And without antibiotics, without doctors prepared to deal with outbreaks, all that was left was to watch the queue of bodies grow. The smell of the disease was unmistakable. Mixture of rotten sweat, open wounds, and dry vomit on the beaten floor. The insects came in flocks, lice, fleas, flies, all ready to spread even more chaos. Sleeping in tents with other sick men was like lying in a minefield. Some would rather sleep outside, even in the rain, than breathe that heavy air of sickness and death. War often did not even need swords. The environment took care of the rest. A fallen soldier meant little. 2, 3. I could still move on, but when hundreds began to faint, vomit, defecate blood, the army stopped. Not by choice, but by sheer impotence. The illness dragged everything away, spirits, strength, and time. A general did not command more men. He commanded the sick, and the worst part, it was just the beginning. In some campaigns, such as the Siege of Carthage, the historian Appian narrates how standing water became a trap. The Romans, exhausted, drank from contaminated springs. Result: disease outbreaks that decimated entire ranks without a single arrow being fired. The mud became a grave. The moans mingled with the night songs of the legions until the music ceased, and only the silence of the piled bodies remained. Not even the gods seemed to listen anymore. Rot beat steel. Rome could be brutal, but it was never naive. The generals knew disease was as lethal an enemy as the barbarians. Therefore, each camp was thought of as a temporary city. With rules, maps, and order, nothing was left to chance. There were defined areas for sleeping, eating, and relieving themselves, and any soldier who violated this order was punished. The discipline was not only military, was sanitary. The so-called metators, specialized soldiers, were the first to arrive at a new location. They analyzed the terrain, calculated distances, chose where the water would be fetched, where the garbage would be buried, where the latrines would be. A positioning error could cost the lives of hundreds. Therefore, these men did not carry swords, but carried the weight of the legion's survival, and often that responsibility was greater than any front-line glory. Even surrounded by dirt, disease, and exhaustion, the Romans imposed an almost obsessive discipline. Taking care of one's own body was an order, not a choice. Soldiers were instructed to clean their skin with sand, shave their hair to prevent lice, and keep their nails short. Every detail counted. Bathing was rare, but when there were rivers or safe springs, everyone went through cleaning shifts. Hygiene was not comfort, it was survival. The centurions did not tolerate carelessness. A soldier who was too dirty was punished because he could drag the disease with him into the tent of others. The group's health depended on individual care, and this also influenced morale. A camp that stank like a sewer discouraged the soul. But a clean environment, even if precarious, renewed the sense of order, purpose, and belonging. Rome knew the real collapse began when the mood died. But not even the inflexible order of Rome could overcome nature every day. In prolonged campaigns, when troops advanced through inhospitable regions, everything fell apart. Springs dried up, rivers became contaminated, the soil turned to mud, and the rules were of no use when the environment became a field of traps. Fresh food was a rare luxury, drinking water, a miracle. The troops slept on soggy ground, exposed to the night cold and sweltering heat during the day. The waste accumulated around, the flies dominated the food. The soldiers did not have the energy to maintain the standard of cleanliness. The fight now was against fever, against festering wounds, against the smell of rotting bodies by the roadside. In these moments, not even the most disciplined of armies was invincible, and the empire discovered that sometimes its greatest enemy did not wield a sword, but he lived in the air that was breathed. Rome, which crushed rebellions with legions of iron, knelt before what could not be killed with swords: the environment. The intense heat made the leather of the sandals burn his feet. The wet clothes stuck like the skin of a dead animal. The swamp covered everything with a mist of rot. The cloudy sky weighed down his shoulders. The fatigue was no longer physical, it was existential. With each step, a man was lost inside. And when the disease became an epidemic, the morale of the troops broke. Veteran soldiers wept silently. Recruits shivered at night, hoping not to wake up next to a dead comrade. There was no honor in getting sick like an animal. There was no medal for surviving the fever. Despair was as common as the sword hanging from the belt, and in the midst of it all, Rome needed to follow. Because to stop was to die. Not for the war, but for what no one saw: the smell, the water, the fly, the fever. A sick army does not march. He does not raise a sword, it does not inspire fear. When disease spread, it wasn't just the flesh that got sick, it was the soul of the legion. Every soldier slaughtered by fever was a gap in combat training. Each cough in the middle of the night was the harbinger of a camp about to collapse from within. The war was no longer external, it became intimate, silent, invisible, but devastating. The glory of Roman banners fluttering on the horizon concealed brutal realities. In several battles in imperial history, the enemy did not even need to be superior in numbers or strategy. It was enough to wait. Wait for dysentery to do its job, that the contaminated water would complete the job, that the soldiers' own bodies would turn against them. And then, just as Rome was to advance, she stumbled over herself. defeated not by the sword, but by the inevitable carelessness of being human. In the end, the greatest test of courage of a Roman soldier was not to face spears, swords, or arrows. It was to survive each day in the midst of the mud, the stench, the fever, and the madness that the silence of the sick spread in the tents. It was to resist hunger, chills, lice, clothes glued to the dirty body. It was to keep marching, even when the smell of death walked with it. That is why, when we look at Roman victories, we need to remember those who did not die on the battlefield, but behind the scenes of glory, defeated by a faceless, bannerless enemy, the environment itself. Because the empire, with all its discipline and power, was still made of men. And these men, as hard as they were, had bodies that rotted and souls that broke in silence. If you liked this brutal dive into the real life of Roman soldiers, leave. You'd like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Here the story is told as it really was, without movie armor.